Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is a game that is universally loved, the pinnacle of fighting games and gaming as a whole. Now before anyone makes any allegations, I do not hate this game. My shared universe concept has an entire parody series that's devoted to Smash. But since the honeymoon period has ended for a couple of years now, I feel like it's necessary to explore and discuss the shortcomings that the game has. Again, that doesn't mean the game is bad, it's just that certain elements I think were done better in previous installments. My main inspiration for this came from a video floating around the web, where it considers Smash 4 as the worst game in the series, leading with the thumbnail as Smash without substance. And on the surface, the video checks out. It's unanimously agreed that people would rather play Ultimate than Smash 4, myself included, as Ultimate has more characters, more stages, more content, and an overall faster gameplay experience, whereas Smash 4 was on a dying console, the meta being completely broken with its final character, and that it secretly served as the foundation for what Ultimate would become, being obsolete at the end of the day. My second copy of Smash 4 that I got in order to get footage because my Wii U's disk drive is shot only cost me $5 at GameStop. $5 for a complete package of Smash Bros should be illegal, but that's the consensus with Smash 4 these days. If it's outclassed, why bother picking it up? But hang on, how much of that is true? Because some elements from Smash 4 did not carry over to Ultimate, leaving it in the dust for either something that is objectively worse or not doing a damn thing to improve on what was returning. In other words, Smash Ultimate sacrifices quality for quantity. This could be said for not just the characters, but other aspects of the presentation feel more like an asset dump than a genuine improvement. Now, I'm no game developer, and I pretend not to be one, unlike some people, but there have been so many things in Smash that has been kept around as far back as Melee, and no one has ever considered to update them for modern times. So think of this video as how Smash Ultimate crams so many things in for the player, yet replacing aspects for no reason, causing Nintendo, Bandai Namco, and Sakurai's Sora team to often overlook glaring details needing to be fixed, and in some cases, looking inferior compared to Smash 4. Hopefully this all changes in the next game in like 10 to 15 years. Let's start with a major difference between the two games, trophies versus spirits. Now, trophies have been an integral part of Smash since Melee, giving you an insight of the fighters and Nintendo history on top of having 3D models of the trophy. However, in Ultimate, these were scrapped in favor of spirits, which could be used to give the fighters modifications or power-ups during fights. So they're a lot more practical than trophies, especially in the game's campaign, World of Light. Now, I understand why spirits replaced trophies. Making complex models for every single spirit would be super time-consuming. Plus, it allows DLC characters to have their own batch of spirits, instead of trophies, which would have likely inflated the cost of the individual character or the fighter's pass. But when it comes to quality, it actually leans in Smash 4's favor. And it goes beyond the fact that one game gives you fully rendered models and the other uses PNGs that you could easily look up online. Trophies come with blurbs, little summaries of what the trophy is, and a footnote on the game and year it came from. Spirits don't have that, so unless you know the context of these characters, you would have no idea who half of them are or their relation to the fighters. And if Nintendo wanted to use PNGs as a cost and time-saving measure, why not bring back stickers from Brawl, which served the same purpose as spirits? If anything, they should have made trophies for just the fighters and have the remaining spirits be stickers, but retaining summaries and descriptions for them, optimizing each character with different buffs, and it would have played more into the trophies coming to life element of the series that is suspiciously underutilized in Ultimate, outside of one cutscene and a trailer. And some of the images they used for the spirits are also inconsistent, like Tarja's spirit is just her in-game portrait from Awakening and not her render like everyone else. It wasn't like her official render was lewd or too revealing, especially when other spirits have more suggestive outfits. So why the swap? Now when it comes to gameplay, Ultimate blows Smash 4 out of the water. The UI is livelier, with abstract icons for stocks, there's a grid to show how far the blast zone is from the player, and characters often being KO'd at over 100% makes the 3-stock matches more intense than the slow but short 2-stock fights in For Glory. That being said, not everything about the gameplay has been refined. In fact, it got worse. Final Smashes have been neutered in Ultimate, to the point where some of them were better in Smash 4. Many of the new and replaced Final Smashes are glorified cinematics that the player has no control over. I understand that in fighting games, having huge cinematics for level 3 supers is common, but Smash Bros. Is not a normal fighting game. It should not conform to the norms of the genre. Whenever a character has a Final Smash, it should affect the entire stage, instead of whoever gets hit by a close or ranged attack. This allows players to react to the oncoming chaos while still participating in the match, rather than baiting and whiffing out a Final Smash, stalling the fight in the process. Final Smashes that allow characters to transform have been removed. Little Mac no longer has a controllable Giga Mac form. Instead, it's just a copy-paste of Donkey Kong's Final Smash. Wario Man has been converted to a cinematic, and Giga Bowser's Final Smash is now a Mario Party minigame. Characters like Pikachu, Diddy Kong, and Supersonic now follow a similar pattern rather than being controlled by the player. The Star Fox characters now share a cinematic instead of calling in a Landmaster. Zero Suit's Final Smash is just the normal Zero laser that Samus has, but instead of firing horizontally, it shoots vertically. Actually, it's no different to Lucario's Final Smash. And Snake's new Final Smash is short and never hits anyone compared to his awesome one in Brawl. They changed so many Final Smashes that didn't need to be fixed, and yet screen-filled Final Smashes stay the same and are still an annoyance to every player. I don't mind a cinematic Final Smash every now and then, but when every character who got a new Final Smash is just a cinematic, it takes me out of the game for a minute as I'm holding the analog stick in the opposite direction, hoping that my character doesn't go past the blast zone radius. It's even more apparent when every DLC character's Final Smash is just a cinematic. Sure, they're referential to the games they came from, but when every character's Final Smash starts and ends the same, it all becomes boring. Kazuya's Final Smash is surprisingly not a cinematic, and Piranha Plant actually has the best one from the DLC. Not only is it a reference to the Super Mario series, but it acts as a dual reference to Subspace Emissary, where PD Piranha was that campaign's first boss. You know it's bad when the DLC character with the most unique Final Smash is the goddamn plant. Next, I want to talk about the music. I'm not complaining about the quantity of the songs we got. Over 1,000 tracks, 50 songs dedicated to SNK's history, sign me up! But the quality and how these songs are featured are really inconsistent, to the point where songs are either missing or shortened for no reason. Most people don't know about the Brawl version of Melee Menu 2. It's a couple of seconds longer, more instruments are added in, and they just never used it again when it's clearly the best version of the song. There's a list online where at least 44 songs from Smash history were removed. Obviously, some of the menu themes are understandably cut, but stage themes perplex me. If Smash Ultimate is the game to bring everything back, why not have every song in the series to make it more complete? But the biggest inconsistency with the music is how some songs are needlessly shortened for no reason. Some of these songs were shortened to fit the hardware limitations of the 3DS version of Smash 4. But now, the game is on a drastically more powerful console with fewer limitations. If you're going to upscale everything you had from Smash 4, you should have restored these shortened songs back to the full version, instead of locking them behind previous games. The biggest example that comes to mind is Brinstar from Melee, where it has a second half featuring brass horns and a calming bridge that loops back to the start of the song. Still not in Ultimate. Another big example is the DK rap, where they removed Chunky and Lanky Kong's verses, so you get this awkward transition from Tiny's verse to Diddy, and then awkwardly thrown back to DK's verse. And the decision of keeping Tiny's verse is weird. Obviously, it makes sense for Donkey and Diddy, but Tiny Kong? A character that has been obscured for years by Nintendo, still retains her verse in Smash? Ultimate should have gave us the full song again, especially when Lanky and Chunky Kong are considered a meme these days. Sonic still has his shortened versions of the vocal songs from Brawl, and honestly, I wouldn't be complaining about this decision had it not been for the fact that the DLC characters get full versions of their songs. The only removal I understand is Dragon Quest music being the MIDI versions here in America, because Square hates us for some reason. But there's no excuse for everything else. We get the entirety of the Advent Children version of One Winged Angel that goes on for 6 minutes, and yet we can't have the full version of Live and Learn or Open Your Heart? When Byleth came out, we got the opening version of Edge of Dawn in its entirety, both in English and Japanese. And yet Lost in Thoughts All Alone is still 2.5 minutes. Why? This is why I feel like Smash Ultimate is an asset dump sometimes. They brought everything back over from Smash 4 and didn't bother trying to improve things that had to be shortened from prior hardware limitations. But would you believe me that Ultimate also shortens songs? Because they needlessly shortened the Ice Climbers victory theme from Brawl's 8 seconds to 5, while other franchises like Fire Emblem keep their victory themes that are also 8 seconds. And again, it's more baffling with the DLC characters who don't follow the traditional victory screen rules. Joker's victory screen loops with a unique UI and has 3 versions depending on what Persona song you played in Mementos. Sephiroth arguably has the longest victory screen, and Kazuya doesn't have music for his victory screen and instead uses the Tekken 7 announcer. And yet Popo and Nana are stuck with a shortened victory theme for no reason. I will say this, however, Smash Ultimate is probably the first time Nintendo has publicly released Melee's opening theme without sound effects. So that's something, I guess. Custom moves were a major element in Smash 4 that was universally panned. These gave each character 8 new specials on top of their pre-existing moveset. Admittedly, many of these custom moves were lazy, unoriginal, hard to unlock, and arguably worse than the default specials. But it was a neat way to give characters more stuff to do, and sometimes added more references to the games they originated from. Ultimate, however, looked at the idea and tossed it straight into the garbage. But not everything was neglected, as Mii's keep their custom moves, and Palutena's moveset was reworked in Ultimate, since Explosive Flame was originally a custom move in Smash 4. I kinda wish other characters got the same treatment.
Sonic and Ganondorf.
At the very least, they could have gave some custom moves to the Echo Fighters, making the clone characters stand out from the original and not ignoring the gimmick as a whole. In fact, you could argue that custom moves were abandoned as early as the middle of Smash 4's production, since none of the DLC characters got them. However, Ultimate should have improved upon giving each character more utility, rather than automatically considering custom moves as a failed experiment that should never be tried again. Giving custom moves to older characters would help make each unique, and the bonus of representing more titles in their series. Link could have had custom moves based on his old moveset, and young Link could have used items like the transformable masks, easily differentiating him from the other 2 Links. Snake could have used more weapons from his games, and maybe the Octo Camo as a stealth mechanism. Bayonetta could have used her other weapons from her games, swapping them out in a down special. And the DLC paves the way for a bunch of possibilities. Joker's custom moves could have had him summon other personas other than Arsene, like Jack Frost or Yoshitsune. Instead of Pyra and Mithra, we could have had Rex, where his moves could vary between Pyra, Mithra, and probably Nia or Numa. Byleth would have been a completely different character, with the 3 main hero relics as his custom moves, ranging between light, medium, and heavy attacks. You could use the same format for the fighting game characters, since that hits close to home. Of course, this proposal is not ideal, since not every character would have a perfect substitute for custom moves, the development process would have been longer, and most characters would suffer the same issues they had in Smash 4. But Ultimate could have at least tried to improve on what Smash 4 struggles with. Hell, I wouldn't mind if characters only got 4 custom moves rather than 8. But it just goes to show that Ultimate neglected something that could have been fixed to be better. Most third-party DLC characters use meters or some sort of gimmick when it also could have worked if they were custom moves in one form or another. And sometimes, with these characters having meters, it feels like I'm playing a really bad Mugen, where characters are ripped out of other Mugen projects instead of feeling like an actual Smash game with consistent polish. It's just another example of Ultimate trying to add more things for the player without improving and or removing elements of what came before. Next are character inconsistencies. Now, many of my problems started in previous installments, but it should have been Ultimate's responsibility to update every character rather than picking and choosing what character and or franchise needed a touch-up. A popular discussion that many people speculate is that Smash 6 will have a massive roster cut, and while I am inclined to agree, I have no knowledge or interest to determine who's getting removed and who's getting added in. What I am hoping for, however, is whoever returns, I hope Nintendo considers making massive refurbishments to everyone in order to make the characters more complex to play and reflective of their up-to-date appearances in their respective franchises. There's only a select few characters I want to discuss, so I won't be going over every series, especially ones I'm not super invested in. Sorry Animal Crossing, sorry Splatoon, sorry Pikmin, and most definitely, sorry Pokemon fans. As a Digimon simp, I have no say in what you guys want removed and added in for Smash 6. Starting off with how certain characters are just straight up misrepresented in Smash Bros, beginning with Bowser and Donkey Kong. This is an obvious complaint. Instead of having their identifiable in-game voices, both characters have generic animal sounds for their voice clips. Now in Melee, it made sense, since neither character had a prominent appearance in the GameCube era at the time, meaning that their personalities weren't as fleshed out as they are today. Hell, Luigi's voice clips were just Mario's voice, but at a higher pitch. But starting in Brawl, a whole console generation had passed, giving both characters unique voices in their games by 2018. And yet they still had animal sounds. In fact, Smash doubled down on this decision to give animal characters less personality from Brawl onwards. Diddy Kong has generic monkey noises for his voice clips. K. Rool has generic lizard noises, something no different from Bowser. And Isabelle doesn't have her usual text babble as voice clips. In fact, Isabelle has no voice clips in Smash, which is weird because they had her talk during her reveal. It's just so inconsistent because other anthropomorphic characters keep their unique voice lines in Smash. Bowser Jr. and the Koopalings have their individual voices, but their father still sounds like a dinosaur. And instead of Pokemon using their in-game cries, they use their voices from the anime. And sometimes, these voices give personalities to characters who desperately need it. I will never understand the decision to make Mega Man a blank slate in Smash. Maybe they wanted to replicate his appearance in Mega Man 2, where he had no personality, but since his custom moves from Smash 4 represent games where he did have personality, as well as using Rush as his default special, a character who was not in Mega Man 2, it self-defeats the purpose. In other crossovers like Marvel vs. Capcom, Mega Man is expressive and has a range of emotions, whereas in Smash, he has no voice clips, doesn't have any personality, and should have been something they fixed in Ultimate, especially to tie in with Mega Man 11, which came out that year. But Smash not only has a problem with giving characters no personality, sometimes they give characters too much personality. Shulk in Smash does not act like Shulk from Xenoblade. If anything, Shulk in Smash acts more like Rhine than he does Shulk. If you played Xenoblade Chronicles 1, you would know that Shulk is a nerd. He's an introvert who always thinks to himself and just so happens to be handed a sword with the power of a god. This is a character who's polite, steady-minded, and always thinks one step ahead. So why in the hell does Smash depict him as a fun-loving maniac wailing the Monado around without a care in the world? The vision he has in the opening cutscene to World of Light was the most accurate depiction of Shulk in Smash. How did they screw it up this bad in-game? Even his final smash is inaccurate. A chain attack in Xenoblade 1 depicts 3 party members, which is what they had in Smash 4, but they added in one more member for no reason, just to add more content into these final smashes without giving a shit of properly portraying Xenoblade. And speaking of not giving a shit of properly portraying Xenoblade, can we just admit that Fiora becoming a Mechon is not a spoiler when Nintendo openly shows it off multiple times? Not only does she appear in Shulk's final smash, in Mechon form I might add, but her spirit is front and center when you enter the spirit board. And this goes further back before Ultimate. I remember being pissed off during the November 2015 Direct where they showed off the Nintendo characters appearing in Project Cross Zone 2, and casually showed off Fiora's Mechon body. The fact that you could get her trophy in Smash 4 easily through the shop is also another indicator. Even the Japanese commercials for the original release didn't try to hide it. I know this spiraled into a rant with how Nintendo mishandles Xenoblade plot twists, and trust me, they did it again with Xenoblade 2. But it's just another example of how Smash makes inconsistent and downright misrepresented decisions when showing off characters and their respective franchises. And lastly, for the inconsistent characters are, of course, Cloud and Sephiroth still speaking Japanese in the American release. Now in Smash 4, Cloud didn't have an English voice, but I was okay with it since A, Roy or Marth had their Japanese voices, and B, Square had just announced the fabled Final Fantasy VII Remake, and would have likely recast the English voice actors from the mid-2000s. But when Sephiroth came out, the first part of the remake trilogy had already been out, with the new English cast. And yet, both characters didn't get an update to their voice clips for Smash. Either a free update would have sufficed, or as a bonus if you either buy Sephiroth or get it free from the Fighter's Pass. And again, I wouldn't bring this up if it weren't for the fact that the older Fire Emblem characters got their voice actors recast to fit with the modern up-to-date VAs from Fire Emblem Heroes. And if Nintendo didn't want to pay Square more money for the English dub of their characters, why not shoot for 3 and restore Mewtwo's Japanese inner thoughts back in Ultimate, including for the American release? To close out this section, I want to acknowledge some wishful thinking that I knew would be inconsistent regardless. Ultimate brought back Snake's codec calls, but they didn't bother updating any of them from Brawl or getting new calls for the new characters. Meanwhile, Palutena's Guidance got new conversations, and some older characters got new ones altogether. This inconsistency I can get behind, since you would need the Metal Gear voice actors to come back to do new voice lines, and the muddied relationship between Kojima and Konami by 2018, that's a can of worms that nobody wants to open. So I understand no new codec calls. I just find it weird that even for Palutena's Guidance, there aren't any conversations regarding the DLC. Truly a baffling and confusing decision on Nintendo's end. Another thing Smash 4 did right compared to Ultimate seems like personal bias, but I have the evidence to back it up. I feel like the hype for Smash 4 was more energetic than Ultimate. A big factor to consider was if COVID happening during Ultimate's run slowed down the momentum. I would say no, since the major lockdowns happened in between the 2 fighter passes, so it wasn't like characters had to be pushed back because of the pandemic. I just feel like Nintendo did more when promoting and generating hype for Smash 4. Not to say Ultimate didn't have its hype moments. Steve breaking Twitter was more than enough hype for Ultimate's entire run. There was also the Sephiroth challenge, where if you beat it, you get early access to Sephiroth. But those were only a few occurrences, where in Smash 4's case, every other month Nintendo was doing something. The Settle It in Smash commercials had personality and humor, unlike the clean and boring ones for Ultimate, outside of the GameStop ad, but that doesn't count. There was a dedicated Miiverse stage in Smash 4, where players can draw whatever in Miiverse and it would appear on stage. Of course, some of the postings were a bit raunchy and edgy, and when the servers shut down, the stage became useless. But at least the Wii U showed it had charm and charisma than how bleak and dull the Switch is. Nintendo also held official tournaments for Smash 4, such as the 2014 Invitational Tournament where everyone lost their minds over Mega Man's Final Smash, and Smash 4 was featured during the 2015 Nintendo World Championship. Nintendo did include Ultimate in the 2019 World Championship, but with the tournament featuring international teams, nobody seemed to care all that much, and the view count certainly shows. But Smash 4's biggest pull was the Fighters Ballot, where anyone can vote for their favorite character to get into Smash 4. There was a lot of speculation and surprisingly no leaks, but it was an overall engaging experience with the fan community interacting with one another and even interacting with Nintendo, something that Ultimate never had, and in its place, the fan discourse during Ultimate's run was mainly hostile. More on that later. Lastly, why I feel like Smash 4 got more hype was because Ultimate never had its own hype train. After every direct, after every piece of news or announcement, people flocked to social media and created Photoshop images of the Smash 4 hype train, claiming that the train was derailing. And it was exciting to see how people would add on to the hype train for something as minuscule as releasing a new batch of amiibos. The videos reinforced the hype with emoji montages and sound effects. Smash Ultimate didn't have that. At best, you would get a compilation of people's reactions to a character reveal. The closest thing Ultimate got to a hype train was the Hose Mad meme, starting with Hero and Banjo during E3 2019. But even that fizzled out by the time the first Fighters Pass ended. And quite frankly, the meme exposed the big problem with Ultimate's hype. It centered around negativity, jealousy, and showed the toxic side of the fandom at face value. Ever since the game's full reveal, featuring the tagline of "Everyone is here" and Ridley's inclusion, opened the door for any character having a chance to be a part of gaming history. The perception changing from the probability to a definitive fact that anyone could get in kind of made the community attack themselves in a tribal way, saying their character will get in and not others. In Smash 4, we had no idea how many characters we would get as DLC. When Cloud was revealed, we didn't know if he won the ballot, only to later find out an immediate direct would reveal the final results. With Ultimate, we knew how many characters we would get in both Fighters Pass, so the mystery was not as intriguing as it was before. We knew Min Min was going to get in because Nintendo told us beforehand the next character would be from ARMS, and considering Min Min's popularity in that game, it was given that she would be in Smash. And for those who wanted to see their character get in Smash, those odds were becoming less and less likely with each slot getting filled out. For people who wanted characters like Travis, Dante, Lloyd, Shantae, Gino, or Doomslayer in Smash, I feel bad for them when other people's picks got into Smash, and rubbing it in their faces. Trust me, I know how that feels. I was in the same boat with Rex, and it sucked. While I am happy Rex became DLC through a technicality, I understand other people are not so lucky as me. These fans waited so long to see their character get in, only to get relegated as a Mii costume. One could say that the costumes at least acknowledge the character's presence and fans, but they're still not the actual characters, and those fans would have to suffice playing characters who range from good to flat out unplayable. Again, I know how that felt. I also didn't like how the term wasted slot was often thrown around during the second Fighters Pass, insulting characters who got in as a form of jealousy. And I could see why people would call characters like Piranha Plant, Min Min, Pyra and Mithra, Byleth, and, God forgive me saying this, Terry getting into Smash, and not their heavily requested characters. No character should be considered a wasted slot. By having a large array of characters from different series and genres, Smash becomes a gateway for players to become new fans of franchises they never considered playing. I became a fan of Xenoblade and Fire Emblem because of those characters' inclusions in Smash 4. Taking it further back, I became a Metroid fan because I found Samus cool in Brawl, and I wanted to play more of her series just from playing Brawl once. And I feel like that's always been Nintendo's intent. Round up their IPs into one multiplayer game that anyone can enjoy, and have fans from one series try out characters from other series, almost to like one big Nintendo buffet. But with how toxic many people got with character reveals and the overall online discourse, I don't blame Nintendo for distancing themselves from the Smash fandom, or the competitive scene for that matter, since this was around the time when a lot of the allegations were being released. All of this circling back to the point that there was barely any toxicity during Smash 4's hype. Everyone was in the dark with how much DLC we would get, and it created an aura of mystique that made everyone excited, regardless of who got in. It just goes to show that Nintendo was able to do more with less, compared to Ultimate, where pretty much every card was revealed on the table. It was a simpler time back then, where the memes included Ridley being too big for Smash, Crumb losing his chance to get in, and people voting for Goku and Shrek in the ballot. Some people wanted Cory from Cory in the House to get in. Yes, the Disney Channel show. Whatever happened to those days? Those days were fun. There's a couple of more things I want to compare Smash 4 with Ultimate to, but since I don't have much to say about each, I'll talk about them back to back. I feel like the starting roster in both games is unbalanced. Where Smash 4 on the Wii U had pretty much every character unlocked, Ultimate's starting roster is the 8 Nintendo 64 fighters, and you have to grind for hours to unlock everyone else. To me, the perfect sweet spot for a starting roster was in Brawl, and even the 3DS version of Smash 4, where both gives you enough characters to play with, but adds intrigue to keep playing, knowing that 40 to 45% of the roster is still hidden. Ultimate definitely has it worse, what with unlocking almost 70 characters before you could actually play your main online. Masterpieces are gone. I'm guessing Nintendo wanted us to cough up $20 to use NSO apps if we want to play retro games. But most Smash players are gonna spend the $20 anyway just to play online, so what was the point of removing Masterpieces? Classic Mode in Ultimate has each fighter on their individual path, sometimes tying into their games, sometimes fighting a different boss. This change was great and helped break up the monotony of fighting the same character in the same order, but I also love the chaos in Smash 4's Classic Mode, fighting multiple fighters in one area, collecting trophies as rewards that could be used as allies. It was great fun. Plus, Smash 4 has the cooler fight with Master and Crazy Hand, where on higher difficulties, you fight Master Core, and the Wii U exclusive Master Fortress. It's definitely a test of reflexes and wit. It can be nerve-wracking, but you feel accomplished when beating it on the hardest difficulty. I didn't bring up how Smash 4 doesn't have a campaign or an adventure mode outside of the usual classic mode, and it does make Ultimate superior in this case, with World of Light being a huge campaign with a lot of maps, challenges, and bosses. But if we're gonna be honest, does anyone like World of Light? It's mostly a campaign where you collect spirits, which you could get anyway in the spirit board, and as mentioned, are no way near as interesting as trophies. Give Adventure Mode and Subspace Emissary credit, those campaigns put the player in stages, fighting enemies that aren't fighters, and doing some platforming, while also hiding secrets here and there. Many of these spirit battles felt like Ultimate's half-assed attempt at Event Match, which is also another mode omitted, instead of being carried over from the previous games. And that's all you do in Smash Ultimate, play Smash, Classic Mode, or Worlds of Light. Compared to Smash 4, where there was Smash Run, Smash Tour, Master Orders, Crazy Orders. Sure, none of these modes were considered great, and some locked behind the 3DS, but that's why Ultimate should have brought everything back and refined them to give us the most complete version of Smash 4, considering that is what Ultimate is designed off of. Showing the true vision of what Smash 4 was aiming to be, but couldn't since it was split onto two consoles. But Ultimate decided to take small bits from Smash 4 and everything else was scrapped, replacing series staples with something that was inferior in every way, adding in every character and stage from the series, but some, not all, got a facelift. Bringing back a campaign that's not nearly as dense as Brawl's, while overlooking problems that needed to be addressed in order to make this Smash the one everyone will come back to. If this isn't the prime example of Smash Ultimate focusing on quantity over quality, I don't know what is. Look, I know I've been antagonizing Smash Ultimate throughout the entire video, but like I said, I'll gladly play it over Smash 4 any day. The gameplay is infinitely more fun and features every character in Smash, but I think it's necessary that we shouldn't forget where Ultimate's DNA came from. We shouldn't pretend that Smash 4 was forgettable and not a huge moment in Nintendo's history just because it's now obsolete. Back then, Brawl used to be considered obsolete when Smash 4 came out, since it was slower, there wasn't a lot of characters compared to the new game, and the competitive meta was broken by one character. Doesn't that sound familiar? But these days, Brawl is greatly appreciated for having subspace in the base game and a massive modding community, almost becoming Ultimate version 2.0 despite running on inferior hardware. Smash 4, on the other hand, is just a worse version of Ultimate, with its modding scene basically being one big shitpost, compared to Brawl's more professional hacks. And also, no campaign. I can understand why people never get back to it, which is why my copy was $5. But just pretending like it didn't offer years of content and excitement is just absurd. Are we going to pretend that there was no excitement when Ryu and Roy were data mined before Smash 4 reveals them as DLC? Are we even going to pretend that Nintendo didn't give us a GameCube adapter for the Wii U starting with Smash 4? Are we just going to pretend that amiibos were not a big thing and a huge commodity in the Toys to Life market when they started in Smash 4? Are we going to pretend that Nintendo didn't allow us to buy a CD with some of the songs in Smash by using Club Nintendo points given to us from Smash 4? I think it's appropriate to look back and appreciate what came before with Smash 4, what it gave us to where we are now, while also questioning and acknowledging the shortcomings that Ultimate has, and many attributes being removed in the final product. And maybe Nintendo is aware of this. The next Smash Bros. May come out in a decade, but who knows? I'm just hoping that whenever it does come out, I hope it'll be a game that features everything I complained that Ultimate struggled with. A Smash Bros. That perfectly balances quality and quantity.